The Black Spiral Dancers are the enemy of all Garou, this much is clear. But where did they come from? Why do they hate the warriors of Gaia, and why are they such dedicated servants of the Wyrm? To understand the enemy, we must know them. We must remember who they were. The White Howlers heired from the Picts of Scotland. They lived in isolation for most of their early history, having little to do with the other tribes, but as the Ice Age forced them and their human kinfolk south, they began to interact with the Fianna, forming an uneasy alliance as this other tribe had made pacts with the Fae, the fair folk, who the Howlers had little trust in. Through the Fianna, the Howlers came to learn of the other tribes, and of the Garou nation, and it is said that they too participated in the Impergium, but that they abandoned this practice on their own, having realized that their ends could not justify these bloody means. Once the Ice Age ended, the Howlers returned north, and once more resumed their isolationist practices, until the invasion of the Romans forced them to take up arms against these invaders. The Romans were after land and slaves, and the Howlers fought back furiously, spurred on by the many banes and fomori brought with these alien folk. Such was their rage that the Romans ejected a wall, called the Wall of Hadrian, to stop these raids. It did little to hinder the Garou, and the Romans eventually had to see themselves beaten back by the Howlers and their Pict kinfolk. Yet even as they retreated and the Howlers returned victorious, they found that the Wyrm had planned this all along. Their cairns were corrupted, their kinfolk turned into fomori, and the Great Purge commenced. They felt the worst of grief as they slew their own kin, but the corruption of the Wyrm ran deep, and there was no saving these lines as their women bore only monsters from their wombs. Realizing that the Wyrm was targeting them in particular, the White Howlers went on the offensive, forming traveling packs who sought out this corruption wherever it dwelled. Eventually they came upon a great festering rift in the world from which pure evil emanated, and the tribe gathered up all their mighty warriors to venture inside. The Black Spiral Dancers speak of this often, and it is used as a lesson to hammer into their young how the other tribes betrayed them in their greatest time of need. No other tribe answered their call to war. No one passed through the moon bridges opened by their thurges to other septs, and realizing that they stood alone against their foe, the Howlers descended into its home, only to be forever changed. Others claim that the Howlers never asked for help. Instead, they simply ventured into this hellish pit entirely on their own volition, confident in their ability to meet their foe head-on. It was this hubris, it is said, that brought their souls closer to the Wyrm, and that their descent into its domain was only the last, final act of overconfidence that sealed the deal, so to speak. Regardless of how it happened, this was the birth of the Black Spiral Dancers. Other Garou had danced the spiral previously. Garou of other tribes would do so later, but the White Howlers remained the only tribe to have wholly succumbed to the corruption of the Wyrm, and only one of their kind was allowed to escape, to tell the tale to the Fianna. Most of their Pictish kinfolk that remained were dragged into the pits of the Wyrm by their Garou kin to serve as breeding stock. Yet some escaped this fate and were eventually absorbed by the other tribes who wanted to preserve and claim this precious resource for themselves. Thus the blood of the White Howlers mixed with other tribes, meaning that occasionally Snow White Garou will be born to them as well. Some believe that the taint of the Wyrm runs in these kinfolk as well, that these humans and wolves did not fully escape the fate that took their kin. The Black Spiral Dancers are especially interested in these throwbacks, and they will often invest heavily into tracking them down, either forcing them to dance the spiral and join them, or slay them for betraying their tribe. These nights, few septs will realize that the Snow White pup who has joined them is actually related, however distant, to the despicable servants of the enemy. But some may know the stories, and thus it is not impossible that they may be shunned or even banished for their heritage. This fear of their potential corruption ironically drives these pups closer to the Wyrm's embrace, as they find themselves easy targets for dancers who may wish to try to recruit them to their cause, using their banishment as evidence of the other tribe's prejudice. When the dancers first emerged from Alpheus, their souls had become twisted and tormented, and they were howling for blood and vengeance. The Garou who met them fought valiantly, and lost many of their numbers, but at the end of it all, the Garou nation was victorious, or at least considered themselves such. Yet none thought of following the path of these werewolves back whence they had come, and so they did not realize that those they had slain were but a fraction of the tribe. Or perhaps they knew, but choose instead to squabble over the spoils left behind, to claim the surviving kinfolk, fetishes, and places of power that had remained untouched by the Wyrm. Regardless of their reasoning, the Garou did not end the Black Spiral dancers, but the dancers lacked the power to pose a serious threat for a long time after. They remained little more than a footnote in the history of the Garou for many years after. They were unable to employ the moon bridges of the Garou, and thus had to resort to slow and methodical tunneling to spread throughout the lands, partly in the real world and partly in the Umbra. Traveling above ground for a Black Spiral dancer, especially before modern times, would be a huge risk for these corrupted werewolves, as roaming packs of Garou would be sure to sense them and subsequently track them down and slay them. Initially, the dancers cared little for the litanies of the Garou. They had no qualms over slaughtering humans, and would often revel in their depravity, killing whomever they wanted, and resorting to even worse things with any that caught their fancy. Yet as the burning times began, and the Catholic Church began to gather their forces to hunt down and destroy supernatural creatures, the dancers suffered massive losses which would take them many generations to recover from, and thus they too decided to at least uphold the veil. Eventually, however, the dancers made their way to America by boat, smuggling themselves across the seas, and found that the sparsely populated New World was a perfect place to hide and grow their numbers in. Many of the stories from early settlers about witch cults performing horrible deeds and partaking in orgiastic practices were in fact distorted memories of their encounters with these Gaia's bastards, who did their utmost to establish a strong population of themselves and their kinfolk, to keep themselves from being wiped out by the other Garou, both native and those who arrived from Europe. In the Old Country, meanwhile, the Black Spiral dancers fared poorly for many years, and as they fled north to Scandinavia, they came to clash with the Sabbat packs that likewise headed that way. Initially, the two fought violently against each other, but over time, the dancers came to realize that the Sabbat had many members as, or perhaps even more, tainted by the Wyrm than themselves. Naturally, not all Sabbat welcomed this alliance, nor did all the dancers, but there are those in the Sword of Cain who care little for the ideals and the sect's original purpose, and those make perfect allies with Gaia's bastards. This tradition carried over to the New World as well, and would prepare both sides for the eventual inclusion of a third agent of the Wyrm amongst their midst, Pentex. Pentex quickly realized the advantage of working together with these former Garou, and over time, the more lucid of their kind would come to hold important positions within their ranks. One shudders to think what depravities these three could work together. It is a well-kept secret among these twisted servants of the Wyrm that the Black Spiral dancers sent to combat the Garou are often the most uncontrollable and corrupt, those whose minds have been completely overtaken by bloodlust and vengeance. In fact, a sizable portion of this tribe can even masquerade as common Garou, the corruption of the Wyrm far from as visible on them as upon their shock troops. These dancers often earn high-ranking positions within Pentex and its subsidiaries, or lead their fellow dancers from the safety of their pit. The Black Spiral dancers gather together in hives, their equivalents to septs, and these hives generally live in and around pits, places of deep Wyrm corruption, sometimes even former cairns overtaken by banes. There they gather and multiply, often engaging in large orgies that will result in the birth of countless Garou born. Yet these are just as welcome as their human and wolf-born siblings, the dancers making no difference from whose loins one was sprung. There is little love amongst these former Garou, however. There is a sense of loyalty, especially after the many hardships that have nearly wiped the dancers out, But the Wyrm has eaten away at most of their purer emotions, leaving behind mostly base desires and wants. There are, of course, exceptions, and some stories tell of how true love could momentarily sway a dancer to stay their hand, but rarely for long. Tragedy befalls anyone who loves a dancer, for their heart belongs to the Wyrm, and it does not like to share. Indeed, life amongst the Black Spiral dancers can be incredibly liberating for any Garou who has had to live under the strict tenets of their sept. But it is also highly dangerous and unpredictable. Violence is common, although this could of course be said for all Garou, but among the dancers this is perhaps even less restrained. The Wyrm feeds off of urges being satiated, so the spirals honor their base impulses as often and intensely as they can. Yet they will never endanger the pit, nor risk its discover willingly. Anyone who does this, knowingly or not, will at best be banished, but more likely hunted down and slain by their former pack. The dancers see themselves as the dark reflection of the Garou. It is not just who they are, it is their duty. They take great pleasure in corrupting and ruining their foe, and they hate the Garou with an intense passion. They prefer torture over murder, however, as they know that the Garou thrive on sacrifice and martyrdom. Dismembering one of their kind, or ruining their mind, leaves a lasting scar amongst the werewolves that may fester and rot over time. The Black Spiral dancers have embraced the idea that Gaia is already thoroughly doomed, and they repeat this often and loudly. They have found that the loss of hope is one of the Garou's biggest threats, and therefore this nihilistic mentality helps sow the seeds of doubt and fear in their hearts. Likewise, many of them have even taken on a more passive approach to their conflict with the Garou, building a life for themselves in the ruin of an already dead world, which only further drives home their ideology in Garou who find them. After all, if they remain passive, any attacks upon them may be seen as attacks upon the status quo, rather than the other way around. Surprisingly, the dancers care for their kinfolk deeply. They know, deep down, that if they treat them as disposable objects of pleasure, toys to discard when they want, the dancers will eventually dwindle in numbers. At the moment, their tribe outnumbers every other tribe individually, and unlike them, the dancers are still growing in numbers. Thus, they tend to ensure that their kinfolk remain relatively safe from harm, yet they probably care significantly less for their mental well-being. Spirals are abusive, compulsive liars, and utterly corrupt, after all. They cannot love, but they may exercise enough restraint that their partners may think they love them, but such beliefs rarely end well. Ultimately, Gaia's bastards are a threat to the Garou simply because of their very existence. They are free from the Garou's litany's constraints, having their own twisted version of it, much more liberal, and their side seems to be winning, after all. Any Garou can dance the spiral, any Garou can become a dancer, and this is what they tell their enemies. We are not so different, you and I. I could show you, if you would only let me. I would like to thank Yiodan and The Toering for their input on the script for this video. The four grandchildren of Cain wait patiently for the time of judgment to arise. Snow, wise beyond his years and powerful in his compassion. Bambi Parsons, a leader with an unbreakable will. Dr. Sheepington, whose wisdom, like the ocean, is deep and broad beyond our understanding. And Dougal, whose thirst for blood is matched only by his strength of will and a purpose. Their childer, the Methuselah, control our every move through their timeless jihad. They are Her Satanic Majesty Dany, whose mere presence chills the heart, Maximilian S. Hardcastle, tutor of countless Ventru in the art of the jihad, Socrates Johnson, whose understanding and compassion knows neither bounds nor limits, Lauren Eason, a skillful and trustworthy ally and friend, the observant and ever-calculative Procyon, the unemployed writer whose words have guided nations, as well as Alexander Cainhurst, inquisitive explorer of the world of darkness. On the Council of the Primogen are seated Edward Reed, Colin Gifford, 06, Stonewolf 18, Ian Nichols, The Black Friar, Ravenfang, Brad Hardwick, Pilgrim, and Ged of Mathrox, wise leaders and of good judgment. This week, the Council would wish to welcome the Autumn Alchemist to the rank of Elder. Thank you so much for your support, and I hope you will feel welcome. We would also wish to once more honor the Ancile Idrin. Your loyalty and friendship is beyond a shadow of a doubt. Naturally, all our elders, Ancile, and neonates receive our gratitude from the bottoms of our hearts. Without your support, this would not be possible. And thank you for watching. Now be careful out there, for the apocalypse may soon be upon us.